Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome aboard. Again, apologies.
We're going to fight the whole time over what to do with the screen, just so you know, because it's also going to be a marriage thing. Like that. No.
So we're going to get started. Okay, first of all, again, apologies about the link for those of you who had trouble getting on. I think we got it fixed and everybody should be able to get on. And now welcome aboard. Okay, so we call this session Parenting. We call this session Parenting During the Pandemic. We're going to do a marriage workshop later, but right now this one is on parenting. The first lesson in parenting during a pandemic is to do what we have done, which is lock ourselves in a room away from our children during bedtime and let them fend for themselves. Ta-da! That is our first lesson in how to parent during a pandemic. I assume you're all doing the exact same thing and doing it very well. So that's where we're going to start. We all recognize that this is the most unusual of circumstances. It is so unnatural. We are and have been home, what's it going on, almost 3 months in circumstances that have changed drastically. I think I've seen, I'm sure you've all seen as well, the idea that it used to be you were either full-time at work, you were full-time at home, maybe part-time and part-time, and now we are all full-time everything all the time. And it is overwhelming for all of us, and particularly difficult as far as managing and really thriving with our kids. And so we wanted just to put together a couple of ideas. We have 4 basic ideas that we want to share, and we'll sort of do it together as we go through and bounce some ideas around that can give us all a little bit of strength and guidance and some tips and practical tools to manage this very difficult situation.
I'm starting?
Yeah.
No, I think you're starting.
Okay, I'm going to start. The first area of the 4 that we wanted to address is recognizing the challenge that we're in and that things are not going to go correctly. They're not going to go well. That's going to happen. It's a reality. And one of the great tools that we can have as we address this unique situation that we're in is starting with that recognition. This is going to be different, and we're going to make mistakes. And within that, we think that there are a bunch of tools that we could utilize within the recognition that we're going to make mistakes that can help us make mistakes better, or fix those mistakes, or teach our children how to address the mistakes that they'll make and the challenges that we face in this environment.
My turn. Okay. So one of the things that we certainly notice, and I think we even mentioned this, and that gosh, I don't even remember how many weeks ago it was, and we did that Ask Me Anything. It was like right after Purim, I think, and this whole thing was just still such a blur. And one of the things we talked about, I think, as we were having this honest dialogue over TCBY, was this idea that, today I'm just going to try to yell at my kids a little bit less than I did yesterday. Like that was going to be the big accomplishment. So if I could just yell one less time. So sort of along those lines, acknowledging that we're all going to lose it, and that is not necessarily a reflection of anything. I don't think anyone should define themselves as anything in their parenting, in their being a partner in a marriage, in any relationship. We're not going to be defining ourselves by how we do now. This is unnatural. Nevertheless, since we know that we're all going to lose it at different points, I think one of the things that we've been talking about is that when we do lose it, what's the least terrible way to lose it? In other words, when, the 30-second spill has happened and it's only 10 o'clock in the morning, or, when so-and-so can't find their iPad because they were supposed to have actually been in class 2.5 hours ago, and, things are just piling and piling and piling, and we know at some point you feel it coming, you're going to lose it. It's coming. Sometimes you have a little warning, sometimes no warning, but you're about to scream, you're about to yell. So when that happens, how should we sound? What should we say? So in an ideal world, in this less than ideal situation, because we're already dealing with a time where we are expecting to lose it, how are we going to express ourselves? So ideally, we shouldn't be in a mode of criticism. We can be in a mode of complaining. I think it's realistic that we're all going to, at some point, raise our voices or lose it. But the tone with which we speak and the words that we say can, I think, make a difference, both to ourselves and how we feel after we lose that we're directing our words at. And so one of the things that I think you had spoken about in an earlier parenting workshop, do you want to talk about that?
I'll start.
That goes?
So let's actually use praise as the paradigm, and then we'll shift from praise into how we would complain rather than criticize. And one of the key phrases that I've always found very, very helpful, and we did share this the last time that we got together, is the difference between evaluative praise and descriptive praise. Evaluative praise is praise that we use, which is in effect evaluating the person to whom we give. And believe it or not, most of the time, it's really not a pleasant way to praise. I mean, the person who is praised doesn't always appreciate it when they're being evaluated. When we say things like, you're the best, you're the greatest, in which we're basically evaluating, you always dress so nicely. When I evaluate who a person is, it often puts a lot of pressure on the person. If I say to my kids after a game, like, you were great that game, you played fantastic. In their heads, they say, well, not really, I messed up over here and I messed up. It lends them, you almost want to deny that what you're being told when you are being assessed as a person. A much more effective way of praising is what's known as descriptive praise. Actually describe what you saw. Instead of when a kid brings you a picture and they say, do you like it? And you say, it's amazing. Instead say, wow, I see what you did. You put red over here and you drew a circle over here and a square over there. I like that. I've described what they did as opposed to evaluated it. When I say after the game and I'm driving my kids home and I say, the way you play defense on that play over there, remember what you did over there and how you stopped them? That was something. When you describe something, it's true, that's what it was. I'm not evaluating the whole person. I'm simply saying that which you did and I describe it. I describe the effort that went in, the work that went in, rather than evaluating the person as a whole. That lands, those kinds of compliments land very, much more powerfully than simply saying something like that was great. And we all have been on the receiving end. I'm sure all of you can imagine. I have to do this every week, but whenever you've had an opportunity to speak, maybe at bar mitzvah or at Sheva Brachos, whatever the case may be, and you put your heart and soul into your talk, and you sit back down, and a friend says, that was great. So you know what to do with that. Were they just saying that? Were they just wanted to be nice? Did they really like it? You have no idea when someone just says, that was really great. If someone says, the way you tied those two ideas together and then you applied it to...
Okay, this isn't supposed to be about how you should compliment him.
That's what it's about. You told me that's what this is about. So I was just choosing a random example.
I know, it's not random. Move to the when you're yelling.
I like the way that you cut me off and express exactly what it is that we're supposed to do. That was perfectly done. So in the same way of how one praises, you describe as helpful, the same thing needs to be done when we explode with rage and frustration, and now it's going to come out. And here's where a couple of thoughtful ideas before we lose it changes entirely from when we say, you are such a klutz, how many times are you going to spill your orange juice? Is an evaluative criticism in which we basically just said, you always, you never, how many times? All of those things create we defined the child, as opposed to saying, it's so frustrating to me when you spill and don't clean up. That's just a truism. That's just what happened. You spilled and didn't clean up. Or you didn't, when it's so frustrating to me when I have to ask 6 times to please go and to take a bath. I'm not defining and say, you never listen. I'm saying, I'm so frustrated when I have to ask 6 times. That doesn't have the same negative impact as a evaluative comment. And to always describe both in terms of praise and describe in terms of what we'll call not criticism, but complaints, is a much more positive environment. One of the So one of the, I always like to say, psychologists like to talk about the 80-20 rule. that 80% of our interactions with our children should be positive. And then you can have 20% where it leaves the child feeling, less than amazing about themselves. 80%. And if you would be a fly on the wall in any of our homes and just counting every interaction between parent and child and just sort of mark, like, did that interaction make the child feel good about themselves or not good about themselves? I'm often afraid. I never experiment for myself because I'd be so frightened as to what the actual numbers are. But just every once in a while, just stop and listen. It's a steady stream of command. Do this, don't do that, start this, get under there. Oh. And it's nowhere near 80%. And using the time that we have, we're all in this together. We're at home all day long to actually make sure to find opportunities to describe positive behaviors. One of the examples that I've used many times in the past, I apologize if you ever heard this from me before, but if somebody would come to us and say, tell me 4 great things your child did yesterday, most of us would probably be like, oh, okay, and we try to go on. And if they say, give me 4 things that frustrated, like 4? I'll give you 40 in 10 seconds. They did this. And we're very good at picking up on the things that, and less good at noticing, and not just noticing, saying something. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking care of that. And that the home should be filled with those positive interactions and taking the opportunities to be able to do so.
Okay, so once we have lost it in the most positive way possible, or at least in the least destructive way possible, we've just gotten super frustrated and we've yelled, and hopefully it wasn't too bad, but chances are if we yelled or we feel that it wasn't the most positive interaction, then most likely the child feels that way as well. So I think to wrap this point up, there are 2 pieces here that are really important. One is when we lose it, is to acknowledge that that's what happened, right? Even if we're not yet ready to apologize, which we'll get to in a moment, but it's just to acknowledge that, oh gosh, wow, I really lost it there, didn't I? Right? Just acknowledging that I made a mistake. I lost it, right? I tried to keep my cool and I just didn't. And I might not be in a good enough place yet to apologize. I think that there's an important message since they are watching us. They're always watching us, but now they don't have, unless they're on the screen, but they don't have, right? They're not getting the same peer interactions, the same interactions with their teachers. There is a lot of nuclear family interaction, and that's really where they're getting most of their feedback right now. And so one of the things that it would be ideal, I think, to teach our kids during this time is that it's okay if you make a mistake. We're the parents, we're doing our best, but the best isn't always what we want it to be, and we made a mistake. So I think acknowledging that we make mistakes is a really healthy thing for our kids to hear us say. We have a saying, I'm not sure if any of our other kids remember, but Shayna still does. She, in particular, our 6-year-old, would get very upset if she spilled something, if something didn't go 100% right. And we sort of developed this thing where we would say to her, right, everyone makes mistakes. Like, I make mistakes, you make mistakes. Did you see? And we would start pointing out to her when we made mistakes. And then we taught her that Hashem's the only one who never makes mistakes, right? And that sort of became like her cute little, if anyone in the house would do something and it wasn't, a great thing, they broke something, they dropped something, they forgot something at school, or they forgot something at home, or whatever. These are occurrences that happen daily when we were leaving our homes. Just that we would sort of make this eye contact, and she would say, and everybody makes mistakes, it's okay. And she was saying it, I think, when she was 3 years old. It was very cute. It's still cute, and she's 6. But so that's the first thing I think is just to teach that lesson that it's okay to mess up. And then that really should be followed by an apology. And this, I think, some of you who I've been talking to know that I've been listening to an awful lot of classes and podcasts. And one of the ones that I've been very taken by is Brene Brown's Unlocking Us. So she interviewed a woman named Harriet Lerner, who's been a psychologist for many, many, many decades and a professor, really a brilliant woman who's written a number of books. And she interviewed her about apologizing. She interviewed her about what does it mean to apologize wholeheartedly, and the flip side, what does it mean to accept an apology? her piece is very long, and I just want to point out, I think, 2 things from what she said. She has I think an ingredient list, I think of 9 things that make an appropriate, wholehearted, sincere apology. I just thought an apology is a waste. You might as well not apologize. So that's the first thing. When we apologize to our kids, let them see that we're accepting responsibility for our behavior and not shifting the blame to anyone else. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is what we do when we are apologized to. And this is something that I think we can model in our homes, whether we're apologizing to our spouses in front of the kids, or whether they're apologizing to us for something. And that is, what do we say in response? So when a child gets up the courage to come to us and say, you know, Mommy, I'm really sorry I called you that bad name. So how do we respond? So the temptation, and I caught myself twice today. As I was writing these notes, I caught myself two times where the kids apologized for something, and I literally, the words came out, it's okay. No, I stopped myself. Saying it's okay, don't worry about it, when someone apologizes to you, takes the wind out of their sails, especially for a kid who built themselves up to be able to say, oh, really sorry, Mommy. Instead of just dismissing it and saying, oh, that's okay, or it's okay. If we say to them, thank you so much. Thank you for your apology. I appreciate it. And by the way, this works with every relationship we're in. It changes the whole dialogue. First of all, it could end the conversation, which very often for the person who apologized is a good thing, because they're already uncomfortable enough that they had to make the apology. So we don't want to drag it out. We don't want to start a whole other conversation. We just want to say, wow, thank you. And if you know it was hard for the person, you could say, wow, I appreciate it. I know that wasn't easy. Thank you for your apology. I appreciate it. And then it needs to stop. As Harriet Lerner says, and she says it much more eloquently than I can, but she says, as soon as you start with the add-ons, when you accept an apology, the whole thing is over. And by add-ons, that means, let's say my child called me a name today, and they came to apologize, and let's say I even get the first part right, and I say, oh, thank you for your apology. But you know, next time that we're in the same situation, if you could please be a little bit more careful with your language, it's over. I just ruined the whole experience, because that child, or maybe that adult, put themselves out there. They made themselves vulnerable in order to apologize. And when I start adding on, right, next time, you know, maybe you'll think a little bit more, or thank you for the apology, but now why don't you go think about what you did? Or I'm not really sure you meant that. Did you really mean that? All of that, it's just bad. So when we get an apology, when we give an apology, we don't use the word but. And when we get an apology, when we receive an apology, thank you so much. Done. No add-ons. And I think this approach to recognizing that we're all going to lose it, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just us, but I'm hoping we're in good company, that we've been losing it now for 10 plus weeks, however many weeks it's been. And I expect that if my children are home for the next, I don't even want to say how many weeks, then it's going to continue to happen. So I'm not working on that at this point. What I'm working on is, how am I going to handle myself when I lose it? What are the words I'm going to say? Am I going to describe or evaluate? And then I'm going to show them that it's okay, that people make mistakes, and then that mistakes are fixable. And the way that we fix a mistake in a relationship is that we apologize, we don't use the word but, and we accept it and just say thank you. Okay.
Can you excuse us 1 minute? Who called you a name today?
It wasn't you.
Okay, second thing we wanted to bring up is the idea of emotions. Emotions is an idea, as described by the great psychologist Chaim Guinot, that he uses a very simple phrase. He said, birds fly, fish swim, people feel. It just is. We have feelings, we have emotions. And most of us grown-ups have a difficult time dealing with that. One gender more difficult than the other generally, but that's just stereotypical. But certainly as adults, we often have, it's complicated. It's super complicated for children to figure out, especially younger children, but even as they're aging through their teenage years, just as much so, to understand their emotions and what they're going through, and the difference between anger and frustration and disappointment and jealousy All of those are big words and complicated for children. And we're in an environment now for nearly 3 months where we're on top of each other. All the kids are together. And sometimes there's a lot of emoting going on. And as parents, one of the most important things that we can do is validate it. Validate, name what it is that's going on. Let's start with a simple example that I got from one of my my mentors, Reb Shlomo Vobe, passed away about 15 years ago in Israel, writes that when you take a toy away from a child in a bathtub, so the child is he's got a little boat in the bathtub, and you take it away from the child because in your mind the bath is taking too long, the loss that the child experiences is the same loss as if your car was suddenly taken away from you and you lost that amount of money in your business all of a sudden. And it's a real experience of loss and trauma, and this is my toy. We as parents will look at it and we would say, that's just a toy, it doesn't matter. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't matter to the child. In the child's world right now, this is what's going on. And if someone would say to a grown-up whose car suddenly was stolen, it's a big deal, it's just a car. You can't say that. What do you mean it's not a big deal? It is a big deal. And we as grown-ups have a certain perspective that's very different than our children's perspective. They're going through things and they're missing certain things because of this pandemic and being at home. And some of the things that they're missing might to us seem trivial, not so important. In the big scheme of things, they'll get over it. And we're right. In the big scheme of things, it's not such a big deal and they will get over it. But to the child right now, this is a big deal. Whether it was not having a grade 6 graduation, whether it was not going on the trip they were supposed to go on, whether it was simply not being able to have the birthday party that they wanted, and they are filled with emotion because of that. And in our world and perspective, we see there's so many bigger things, and they're gonna listen, everybody's dealing with it. Saying that, you just gotta deal with it isn't helpful to the child who's going through that. In their world right now, this is a big deal, and therefore it's our responsibility to validate the experiences that they're going through in their world. For a 3-year-old, for a 6-year-old, for a 10-year-old, whatever it may be, it could be a 15-year-old, to acknowledge the trauma, the loss, the frustration, the disappointment, and not minimize or downplay that they're missing out on something that they really wanted to have. We don't need to offer to fix it. It's a trap. We often find we'll somehow find a way to. You don't need to fix it. You just need to name it. I know it's so frustrating that you're not able to have whatever it is that you wanted. It's so disappointing. I know it's so disappointing, and I'm there with you. I get it. It's so disappointing, and that's it. It's so validating for us as adults and for our children just to understand that we get them, that we understand what it is that they're going through, and label it. There's a great phrase that if we can say it, then we can live it. We can live with it. If we can describe it, then we can live with it. This is what it is. I got it. We understand. And we're not going to pretend it's not there. It is. It's sad. It's frustrating. It's hard. But let's deal with it together in that frustration.
Right. I think just to add to what you said, I think when we validate our kids' emotions, especially now, even if we're not feeling so compassionate, because we don't have a lot of anything inside of us so much, especially when it comes out at bedtime and all those other inopportune times when they're all of a sudden feeling like talking about their feelings, but you were there all day and they didn't want to talk about their feelings. And, only when you need them to be asleep because you're done being a parent for the day do they want to discuss. So to the best of our ability to lock in as much compassion as possible, to find it somewhere, even if it's deep, 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 deep down, to find some empathy. There is really, you have infinite amounts of empathy and love to give, even though you think sometimes you don't, but in reality we do. And that our kids need from us the validation combined with a lot of compassion. I think labeling and naming emotions is really important. In particular, not just because most kids, and frankly, most adults, don't have the capacity to distinguish between certain emotions, and this is like a real opportunity for us. I don't know that the school system anywhere in the world has really gotten down the really important task of teaching our children how to label their emotions. I know it's being worked on all over the place, and schools are doing a much better job than they did when we were in school, teaching children how to recognize their emotions and then to be able to express them, to label them. Part of it is teaching them how to label and teaching them that it's okay to be with an emotion, that you don't have to push away sadness, you don't have to push away frustration or jealousy or anything else that they might think is a negative emotion. Part of the compassion and the empathy is showing them that there's no such thing as a bad emotion, right? Like you quoted Dr. Guinaut. Emotions just are. They're just a part of who we are. And you can have conflicting emotions at the same time, right? Most of us have experienced this in our lives if we ever tuned in enough. When you let one in, you let the other in. So I could be feeling, very anxious during this last stretch of time, and also be feeling very grateful at the same time. And that's okay, right? It's okay to sit with both of those. Anybody who's experienced a profound loss knows that you can be extraordinarily, profoundly sad and still somehow be able to tap into some kinds of either gratitude or even like tastes of joy. Like if you've been in a Shiva house where everybody's crying and then they're also laughing within a few moments because someone shares, a memory that brings everybody joy. That's very human. And it's good for our kids to see that we can experience more than one emotion at a time. We can label all of them and we can sit with them. We don't just have to, fix them, God forbid, not to push them away or to deny them, to sort of invite them in and to sit with them. And then I think just to your point, actually, I'll just mention one other thing. What's his name? Dr. David Kessler, who himself studied grief, like decades and decades and decades. And then unfortunately himself lost a young adult. His child was a young adult when he died. And he was speaking about the pandemic. He's experienced all kinds of loss personally, and he's counseled thousands of people in his career. And he said, the greatest loss a person can experience is the one they're experiencing right now. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. There's no need to compare. It just is hard. And he was saying people need to realize that what's going on now is a tremendous amount of loss, and there's a tremendous amount of grief, and it's substantial, and that we have to give that to our kids. And then, not in the moment, but a little bit later, is to give the kids what they can't give themselves. And that is perspective, right? In the moment, we don't want to say to them, oh, I know it's so hard that you didn't get to have your birthday party, but none of us are sick. None of us are dead. Like, that's great. Not going to be so helpful. But what we can do is to be able to say to them later, when the wave of emotion that they're experiencing has passed, and generally it does, right? The waves come and they go. When they're in a better place, is then to try to give them some kind of perspective on what it is that we're experiencing. Perspective is one of those things that you only get when you've lived for a while, right? We can't expect children to have a lot of perspective if their lifespan is only so long. Perspective, by definition, means you have what to look back on. So one of the things that I think as parents we can give our children, and I think this is really important with teenagers, but it certainly is important with young children also, is to articulate what many of them already know, which is, yeah, this is a lot to deal with, but oh my gosh, are we fortunate that like our kitchen is filled with food and we're all home together, and whew, it's really crazy what's going on out there. And we're really, never to minimize that they were upset before, because they had every right to be upset, but just to try to put it in some kind of context. As Jews, this is like something unfortunately, we're very good at. We have thousands of years of history with all sorts of terrible things that have happened to us. So we're finding our place. I mean, we're not going to compare and say this is better or this is worse, whatever, but we're just going to say, unfortunately, for thousands of years, there have been times where the Jewish people have had to miss out on simchas, right? Where they've had to struggle through different things. But again, we don't want to do that while the child is experiencing their difficult or challenging emotion. We want to just validate, invite in all those emotions, label all of them, have a huge emotion party, not send out any of them, to validate, give a lot of compassion. And then when it's appropriate later on, when the kid is feeling a little bit more secure, a little bit more stable, to try to give them some kind of perspective on what's going on.
I would just add one other thing on that idea, where you can't give a child perspective when they're in the moment. Just so one last point on this idea of emotions, we can't parent a child at all when the child is emotional. When a child has lost it, a child is highly emotional over whatever it may be. So that child is unparentable right now. That you can't speak rationally to a person who is irrational. They are emotional. So you have to let them calm down before you try to give any valid instruction. So that's half of what needs to be remembered, that when the child is in a highly emotional state, they're not in a place there where they're ready to learn anything. So it's just a matter of getting beyond that state, whatever needs to be. And I think possibly even more important than that, the other side of the coin is, we can't parent when we're emotional. Meaning, we're parents, we're also human beings. We sometimes get so frustrated, we're so tired, we're so overworked, we so want to be doing something else. We feel it in ourselves. When that happens, you have to just stop and recognize, I'm not going to be a good parent right now, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to say, I'm going to talk about this later. You have permission to do so. As long as the child's not in danger, just say like, wait, I'm not ready to talk about this. And when you're not as emotional and the child's not as emotional, something productive can come out of it. Nothing productive is going to happen if either you or your child are highly emotional. Just keep that in mind and pull yourself out and wait and delay and address something. Your children will remember. Whatever it is that you want to talk to them about later, they'll remember. But just we and they can't be emotional when we try to address anything.
Right. The kids were reminding us, I don't remember, one of the many Friday nights that we've been sitting and talking, the kids were remembering how I used to put myself in timeout and how they thought it was so weird that their friends got put in timeout, but in our house, only the mommy went into timeout. Because when I knew that I was losing it and I was afraid, God forbid, of what I was going to say or what I was going to do, I would run into my room and close the door. And I didn't know what was going on outside my room, but I just knew that I wasn't in a place to interact with them. And it was funny to hear, like, what did they think of that? They didn't get it at all. They had no idea. So I was able to explain to them, give them a little bit of perspective. Okay, so third thing?
Third thing is that the words we use, going back to the power of the words that we use, as we were speaking about earlier about how to praise and give positive feedback, the words we use create the narrative of our homes and our situations. They do a lot. We'll talk a little bit even more about how it creates the self-esteem of our children, but our words create the narrative. Let's focus on one thing first, and that is the narrative of what we're going through. The narrative of what we're going through. I want to give an example. When we lived in Atlanta, there was a wonderful kindergarten teacher.
There still is.
There still is. She's still there, but we're obviously not. Her name was Moradina. And she did many, many amazing things with the kids. And one of the things that we picked up on that we loved and learned a lot from is that when the kids would come into her room in the morning, she would say to them, Yiladim, we are going to have an amazing day today. And then halfway through the day during lunch, she would say to them, Yiladim, we are having an amazing day today. And then when they would leave the classroom to go home, she would say, Yiladim, we had an amazing day today. And then the kids would get into the car and the parents would say, how was your day at school today? And the kids would say, it was amazing. And
no, it was better than that. Baruch Hashem.
Baruch
it was
Hashem,
amazing because it was like the full, you could hear the teacher talking through the kids.
And she literally created the narrative that they were having an amazing day. And they would come home and say they had an amazing day. And they did. And it might not have been amazing in every sense, but the voice in their head was that this is going great. We're doing amazing. And we learned a lot from that. And I think you can too, and we share that. We're going to create the narrative of this pandemic. Our kids are sitting around our table every meal, every Shabbos. It's just us. They hear what we're saying, how we're describing this. If the words that we use all the time are, this is a disaster, this is crazy. This is never going to end. I'm going crazy. I don't know how to. Then when the voice that they have in there, the narrative of what this 3-month period is going to be like will be, it was a disaster. It was horrible. There was no end to it. Whereas we can create the narrative and say things like, this has been really long and hard, but we are doing this. We are making it another day, and we succeeded. Another Shabbos, you sit down Friday night and say, hey, it's another Shabbos. We made it another week. We've succeeded. And we can actually create, now you know, as you're saying that, all the times that didn't go exactly, they were supposed to go according to plan. Welcome to life. Nothing goes according to plan exactly. But hey, you're sitting around the Shabbos table, another Shabbos has come, another week went by. We can use our words to create the narrative and say, and to celebrate, we did it. Another week went by that we have succeeded and thrived, and we went to school, and I went to work, whatever it was that's going on, to actually to use those words. I would add to that before I turn it back over. I was part of an organization once where they put on a lot of programs. They ran a lot of events, and what I remember most about that organization was every morning after a major event, where they would put in literally weeks, if not months of effort, the morning after, the head of the organization would bring in a bottle of schnapps and some cake, and they would take 10 minutes before they went on to the next thing to celebrate. Before, there always was something else coming up. There always was the next thing, but they never started the next thing until they took 10 minutes and just celebrated what they did. And it's a beautiful idea to celebrate accomplishments. And that's also something that we can bring into our homes regularly, to celebrate accomplishments, whether it's on a Friday night to celebrate the week that went through, and with forethought, like what do we want to acknowledge? To acknowledge what was done, what was accomplished, that literally the kids, we're going to create the narrative in their heads. And we have the ability to create, it was successful. Look at what we did. Look at what we accomplished. Look at what we've been able to do together, and to take out nothing more than a minute, but that there is a 60-second period of time every week, if not you do it once a day, just to acknowledge what was done. The classes, if the kids went to test it, they took exams. Celebrating the little things is a fabulous thing to do and to get into the habit of doing, and it creates a totally different atmosphere in the home, and it makes them look for things, ask them what they want to celebrate, what they accomplished to do together.
So just on the note of the narrative that we sort of create, something that I think I learned recently that was surprising to me, I'd sort of always been under the impression that the greatest influence on a child is their circle of friends. I don't know if I was taught that at some point, if I read research that indicated that that was the case, but more and more it seems the research in the area of psychology in adolescents and adults is much more that the voices we hear in our heads as adults are the voices from our, what you call like your first family, like where you grew up, meaning in the home that you grew up. The most of the time as an adult, the voices you're hearing in your head, the narrative you have is really from when you were a child, which is to say that we generally really filter our experiences based on our experience at home. That even though there's a tremendous amount of social input, although I think I would argue that now there's less, now that our kids are not spending as much time with their friends, and they're interacting with fewer adults than they normally do in their typical school day. But the surprise is that as parents, we have a lot more influence over our children, and the recordings that they have in their heads are really us. It's really our voices. And so one of the things that I think is mutually beneficial, like you were saying about creating this narrative, it's beneficial for us and it's beneficial for them to use hopeful, positive, encouraging, optimistic language, even when we're not feeling it. It's faking it till we make it, right? Because a lot of times, the more you say it, the more real, like in the vein of a Moradina, even though those days were really all truly amazing, because she is amazing, and she is just a force of positivity. But even if we're not there internally, even if it's not really necessarily so accurately reflecting the reality of what we're living, to say it anyway, to point out like, wow, I did not know how this was going to go, but whew, turns out this is really hard. And like, we're doing hard things. I had no idea that we could manage such a hard thing like this. Like, wow, this has really been going on a long time, but it's got to be over sooner than later, right? Things don't last forever. Using more positive language than even what we might think is really appropriate, pushing ourselves in the area of positivity, not just because it's good for the kids, but it's also good for us, that it is a very valid coping mechanism, right? Positive self-talk is something that is recommended by all therapists. To change that negative voice in your head is to switch it to a positive voice. And it requires a lot of effort, but when the talk leaves your mouth, meaning not just when it's in your head, but when you actually verbalize it, you say the words out loud. So we do create a different environment in the house. And it's not to be a Pollyanna and pretend like everything's always perfect, but it's just to create this positive narrative. And then when things aren't as good, it sort of gets overwhelmed by the positive that we've always been talking about. There's like this positive, positive override, a positive sentiment override that we have, which is a good thing to have in a home. It's a good thing to have in individual relationships, right? Because, you notice the negative less when you're constantly bombarding with the positive. Just do the last one.
Yeah, excellent. The last thing we wanted to touch on is a phrase which I remember learning from Dr. David Pelkovitz, which is required helpfulness. Required helpfulness is exactly as it sounds. You, as a child in this home, are required to be helpful. It's not called volunteer work. It's not because you're going to get paid for your work. As a member of this household, everybody is required to be helpful. And that idea, it's complicated on a couple of different levels, but it is so important that we teach our children at a young age that that's not an option. It's not something that you can choose to do or not to do. Part of being a part of the family is that everybody has something to do, because it's actually in the child's best interest that they grow up knowing that they have responsibilities that they have to do. And sometimes it's so much easier for us to do it ourselves. Like I'm not saying to do this because they need to be helpful, so that it's helpful to us. Most of the times when they're being helpful, it's not helpful at all. It would actually be easier, faster, and better done if we would do it ourselves. But it's important. It's important that they grow up in a home where everybody has what to do, that they are trained, that that's something that everybody does. And to give out jobs daily, if not for sure before Shabbos, in terms of the cleanup, because it teaches them. It's an approach that everybody has to do something. And Rivki really likes to talk about this more in terms of how the benefit that it gives to the actual children themselves as they grow up in that home. And it's something that everybody does just because. Because why do we need to do this? Because you're part of the family, everybody does something, which before Rivki will describe that in a second, just that phrase reminds me of something which in the previous workshop that we had spoken about a lot, when a child begins to ask questions like, why do I need? Why can't I? And all of those lovely questions which children can ask about 20 to 30 times a minute. And we don't have answers that we want to engage with them. It's just because, that's the answer, because. The best thing to do is to not engage in a dialogue that has no answer. When a child says it's 5:30 and you're about to serve dinner and they want ice cream, and you say, I can have ice cream right now. The answer is no. So they say, why not? So it's tempting to say something like, because we're about to have dinner. But the problem is, if you engage that dialogue, every child worth keeping, and all of your children are worth keeping, will have a response to that, which will sound something like, I'll have ice cream now and I'll eat dinner. And then what's your response to that? No, you won't. And then they'll say, yes, I will. And then you say, well, you didn't last week. And they'll say, well, I will this week. And it's on and on. There's no end to that dialogue. If you engage with a very talented 4 and 5-year-old, they will always have an answer. And so don't engage. The phrase that I've picked up over the years and I've shared with many of you is, the answer is because I love you. Why can't I have ice cream? Because I love you. Why do I have to go to sleep now? Because I love you. Why can't I go outside and play? Because I love you. And at this point, all the kids know, like, once they hear that, like, oh, hate when you say that. And I say, I love it when I say that. And it's the end of the conversation, because there are dialogues, conversations with our children that don't have an answer that they will ever accept. So don't engage, and just have that one catchphrase, because I love you. So when they say, like, why do I have to do this job on Erev Shabbos? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? Because I love you and you have to do it. End of the discussion. I'm not going to give a reason that you need to be helpful. I'm not going to give a reason that I have so many things to do. I'm not going to say, do you know what I do for you every week? All I'm asking for you is this one. None of that. Why do you need to do it? Because. And then you pivot and move away and just leave it as it is. Don't engage. Expect it to be done and go about your day with the expectation that it will be done without an argument. You simply state, this is what it is that I need you. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. And then that's it. And to train them in that. And the reason why this is so valuable is.
Okay, before we get to why it's so valuable, well, it is valuable. Like you said, it's not necessarily valuable for us. And in fact, most of the time it's annoying. I think those of us who have older children already, where we have an expectation that they're going to realize, I know some people still have cleaning help. Some people at this point do not have cleaning help, and we used to. And that has created this sort of like, well, don't they see that I'm killing myself, folding all this laundry and cleaning the bathrooms, and how come nobody's helping me? And this is one of those areas where it is just pretty much a given that if our family members haven't figured out how to read our minds before the pandemic, they're not becoming mind readers during the pandemic, definitely not during quarantine, where they're just seeing us all the time. So I think it's a trap that I know I have fallen into a number of times, where I am making as much noise as I can, washing those dishes, slamming pots and pans, and closing cabinet doors very loudly, because I'm sure if I do it just a little louder,
that's why you were doing it.
Someone's going to realize, like, oh gosh, mommy seems to be like washing an awful lot of dishes, and come to think of it, I don't know, I've been around for like 10 weeks and nope, I haven't washed anything. But that's not going to happen. So for those of us who are blessed to have older kids around, there is, I think, a certain trap that we might fall into, thinking that either our spouses or maybe those older children are going to realize that they need to chip in. They're not. And this is our opportunity to teach them that without criticism and, of course, without cynicism, the dishes don't wash themselves, right? That's not going to be helpful. But saying, like, you know, it would really be, do you have a couple of free minutes now? Are you in the middle of, oh, okay, fine. If you have some time, would you mind? And if they offer, like if you have one of those golden moments where somebody offers, and I have to tell you, it's sometimes tempting just to say, no, I got it, sweetheart. It's okay. It's okay. I got it. You go do what you were doing, or you go study, or you do whatever. Bite through your tongue. If they offer to be helpful, grab it and then grit your teeth when you go and have to eat off those plates later, because you know they're not really so clean. But it's a worthwhile investment. It is so important for their self-esteem, for their sense of self-worth, to know that they contribute to the family, that they have helped you, gives them a tremendous positive feeling about themselves. And it's definitely true with older kids. It's also true with younger children. So there is, you know, Dr. Palkovitz, like you said, is very fond of this as a concept. He pushes it for a number of reasons. He essentially sees it as giving your child an immunization. It's like a booster shot, because the benefits, the health benefits, the physical benefits, as well as the mental and emotional health benefits to children who are raised in a home where there is required helpfulness. And that doesn't have to mean scrubbing toilets. It might mean taking the younger sibling outside for a walk, or helping with the dog, but whatever it is that they do it, and then it's reasonable for them, and then it meets their age, and of course their level of ability, all of those things. But that it is literally, you lower the risk of almost every scary thing that we all get nervous about as we become older. All the scientific research shows that there is a reduced rate of those scary things in adults, young adults who have been raised with this notion, because they develop a sense of altruism, they become volunteers, they become people who participate in their community, who raise families with those ideals, and so it's invaluable. So I have to say, it's actually, even though it's more frustrating than it's ever been, it's easier than it's ever been, because as it happens, our housekeeper is not coming. So on Friday, there's like a whole list of things for people to help with. And we tried different things. Like one week I thought I'd make it fun. It didn't really work out, but I put all the different things that had to be done on pieces of paper. And then I stuck them, I think, like in a bowl, and everybody had to pick 2 things. And then of course there were 1 or 2 things that like only Shayna could do. So I had to make sure that she picked the ones. It got a little complicated. And then of course the kids start trading, but nevertheless, I thought that would make it a little bit fun. It was a little bit fun for that week. But you know, this whole thing has lasted a lot longer than I intended. So now it's sort of like, I'll take out the garbage again. Okay, fine. I'll do the bathroom. You know, it's like we go through that routine. And the bathrooms are not clean the way I would want them to be clean. But it got done, and somebody knows that he has contributed. And I have told him more times than I can count. I hope he's hearing all the times.
I'm listening.
Yeah, no, it's not you. It's not you. It's not him. You know, that, wow, knowing that I don't have to clean those 2 bathrooms on Friday when I've already been cooking all day and trying to, you know, wipe down all my groceries and what other nonsense we're all doing in our homes. Wow, that was like really took a load off my plate. I am so grateful to you. I really, really appreciate it. So it is good for the kids. It is good for their mental health, their overall physiological well-being. And even when they resist, and even when, like you said, they engage you in the never-ending argument of why, they just have to do it. And whether, you know, in a certain age group, you can just say, as we do in our house, right? There's no screen until you've done the jobs you have to do for Shabbos. And man, that generally works really, really well. So it's that. And then also it lends us an opportunity to find those positive things that we've been really trying to find in our kids, but sometimes it's hard to find when you're like staring at each other all day. As I think we said in that class a couple of weeks ago, we're all so busy on Zoom all the time that we're like zooming into everybody's negative stuff. We're all living under a microscope. And we're trying to notice less. We're trying not to hear every bad thing that they say, and we're trying not to see every bad thing that they do, or difficult thing that they do. But you know, it's kind of hard. One of the benefits of required helpfulness is that the kids are actually doing things that we can then compliment. And we're not going to say like, oh, you're the best, you're the, you know, biggest rock star because you know, we're going to try to use that descriptive praise that we talked about. Like, wow, that was so helpful for me because I don't know, that bathroom, there was like hair all over the floor from the haircuts. And when I went in, like the hair was gone. I don't know how you did it. That was really helpful. Thank you. And to go back to that point you mentioned about celebrating, that especially now when we really want to focus on things, to make a big deal about it, to not assume like nothing is move on, may love. We don't take anything for granted these days. When someone does something, we have to mark it, acknowledge it, thank it, celebrate it. I think in general, we're all better at that when we are outside our houses with the people that we don't spend a lot of time with. Like it's very easy for me to show gratitude to the person who bagged my groceries or the person who held the door for me. I don't even remember what that's like when someone holds the door for you. That would be like so scary now, but you know what I'm saying, in theory. But that this is an opportunity to thank the people and show gratitude to the people and to celebrate the people that we sometimes have a harder time tapping into that because we're with them all the time. So when we give them things to do and then they do them, so that's a really great opportunity to celebrate them. Okay.
Okay, amazing.
So I wanted to keep it to an hour. It's pretty good. So those were the 4 things we wanted to talk about. I, of course, had like 20 other things, but he's much better than me at condensing and saying, well, no, we don't really need to talk about that now. No, we don't really need to talk about that. So those are the 4 main things that we decided we wanted to talk about with regards to parenting during this very challenging time. You're all clearly doing great because you managed to stay on a Zoom call from 8:30 to 9:30. So if anybody has any wisdom that they want to share, tips for other parents because you guys have it all figured out clearly, or any questions or anything, you can unmute yourselves. Yeah,
sure.
Makes sense? Anybody have anything they want to share?
Before I guess anybody does so, or while you're figuring out how to unmute yourselves, I would just add one other thing we spoke about earlier about descriptive praise, about finding something and being able to describe what a child has done well. It's a great thing to actually try to do one a day, like to actually practically have in your mind that for every child in the home, I'm going to find one thing and just describe as a compliment something that they did as a task to have in your head that you can check off, that you could say at the end of the day, like, I did it. I know that I.
Gosh, you can do that. That's so hard.
You can do it. I'm not.
That's way too much.
Just one of the children. Pick one.
No, do it for your spouse. Let your kids see that you do it for your spouse. That's good enough.
Okay,
we can't give people more things to do now. We all have too much to do.
They can handle it.
No, it's too much.
I believe in you.
I disagree. I believe in you too. I just don't want to give anybody homework.
I would
say one nice thing to your spouse.
You did an amazing presentation tonight. You were clear and concise, and you gave practical advice for people to take home. It was really.
Thank you for that.
There's just one last thing that I'll also just throw with. There's an idea of phrases of unconditional love, which are simple things which we intuit, but our children actually don't hear from us in the way that we think we say them, because we don't actually verbalize them. Things that simply say, I love you so much. You're the greatest gift that Hashem has given me. Say to all of the children, I'm not one more than another. I'm so happy that you are my child. Believe it or not, most children never actually hear the words from their parents that say, I am so happy you are my child. I love that you're my child. It's such a powerful thing. We take it for granted that they understand that that's how we feel about them, but they very rarely actually hear those words if we don't make an effort to say them. And it's something to actually, you don't have to do it once a day to each child, but it should be something where that's the narrative in their head. They don't just get it from the actions that we do. They actually hear the phrase, you are such a gift to me. I'm so proud that you're my child. I'm thrilled. I love that you're my child. That it's something that just unconditional, not because they did anything, just actual statements of how much we appreciate having them around. It's very, very powerful for a child to hear, and something that they should hear. And that little roll of their eyes that they give you when you say that, it's the best. They get even better at that as they get older. But it's really valuable. It's really a valuable way so that they should hear that in their heads, those words coming from their parents.
Right. And I think like for younger kids, it works really well at bedtime because they're anyway happy for you to sit there for another 10, 15, 20 seconds, whatever it is. Right. You're the best present Hashem ever gave me. You're the best, all of that kind of talk for younger kids. And I think for older kids who might look at you like you lost your mind if you first start this when they're teenagers, when you're giving them a bracha on Friday night, where they're anyway, like their eyes are already rolled into the back of their head because you're hugging them for too long, then that's a really good time to whisper it in their ear. Like, oh, I'm so happy you're home with us. Like having you here is just the best. I'm so grateful. Thank you, Hashem, for, for giving me this child at this moment or whatever. But saying those things out loud, I think really it is quite powerful. Okay, that homework you can have because it's like once a week, maybe. Once a day, every kid is like a lot.
I don't think there's any age limit to that one.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you.
Doesn't matter
I'm into that.
How old you are. It's always great to hear and to say.
Spoken like someone who knows coming from both ends, right? From
ta-da!
And as the parents. She knows. Linda knows. That's for sure.
That's it.
Okay.